I don't see this.
Okay. Okay, so it's just 3 students, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then everybody should be in the lesson. Okay. Can you all see me and hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay, in that case, I will share my screen as well. Okay, so can you all see the study?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna make you all contributors so you can move the pieces. And let's get started. Okay, so I would like to start out with a little bit of review from last week's material. So we're going to do a couple end games. First off, it is white to play and find the best move here. So if you're playing white, based on the concepts we covered last week, what would you play here?
Rook c5.
Rook c5 with the idea, let's say black moves the king. What's the idea here?
Rook h5.
Correct. Because what's the principle for you here?
Rook and kill the pawn.
Rook belong behind pass pawns, right? Y'all remember that?
Yes.
Okay, good. You don't want the rook to go in front of the pass. Okay. Glad you guys remember that. Okay. Do you guys remember this one? What to do here is white. It's white to play and win, right? So our problem, obviously, is that the king is in front of our pawn, and we can't promote it until our king gets out of the way. So how do we get our king out without it getting repeatedly checked? White to
Rook d1.
Right, rook d1. King moves, and now what?
We can now move the king to c8.
Rook d4.
Rook d4 is correct. So we're building that bridge, right? You guys remember building the bridge? Now after black makes some move, the king can come out, right? Safely. And then we can build the bridge. All right. And now here, what's the key move for white to achieve a draw?
Rook a8.
No, because if rook a8, we run into this kind of trouble.
Rook
There's
a3.
one.
Rook
yes,
a3.
rook a3, right? We control the third rank, and as soon as black pushes the pawn, what do? So black's threatening king f3, right?
Go to a8.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, a8, my bad. And then we can keep checking from behind. Yeah. So this is the one we want. And then the king goes here, and we can keep checking from behind indefinitely, and we've saved the draw. Okay, good. So you guys remember the stuff we've covered last week about endgames. So now I'd like to change topics, and I want to discuss how to attack the king. So this is generally a pretty fun topic. You get to learn about how to attack uncastled kings, castled on opposite sides. So we're going to start off with attacking the uncastled king. Okay? And you all know that you need to castle early in general, right?
Yes.
You want to generally castle within the first 10 or so moves of the game. keep your king safely tucked away on the side of the board. And if you don't do this, then your king is vulnerable in the center, and it's easy for your opponent to attack, right? So what we're going to look at today is how to attack your opponent if they leave their king in the center, okay? So we're going to look at one of my games that I played in July. Is everyone still following? Megan's School is not in the study, by the way. So you guys can all see my screen, but I'd like you to also be in the study so that you can move pieces when I ask you.
Okay.
I can here, click this link, please. Okay, in the meantime, so I'm going to go over this game. My opponent played the Caro-Kann defense.
E4, C6.
Yes, E4, C6, and I played the Pan of Botvinnik here. It's defined by C4. Okay. And so far, this is a typical opening. And now, my opponent makes a mistake here. So he should have gone into this line, which is, it just trades down into the end game. It's a lot of theory. But the problem with knight b6 is that it's passive. So the knight's retreating, and now you'll notice that I have the initiative. So I'm developing my pieces, and my opponent's pretty far behind in development. It's going to take him several moves to get in a position where he can castle. Okay, so he trades off, and now he makes a bigger mistake. So he plays g6 in an effort to eventually fianchetto his bishop and then castle. However, this is the kind of position, if you've completed a lot of your development and your opponent still hasn't castled, then that is a good time to strike. So this is very tempo critical. Okay, if I just wait a few moves, if I play normal developing moves like bishop e2 and I castle myself, he's going to get castled and he's going to be okay, right? So I don't want to give him the chance to do that. So if I notice that I'm way ahead in development and he's several moves away from castling, I want to seize the opportunity immediately to start attacking, and I never give him the chance to castle. Okay, so you got to take the chance while you can, and don't be afraid in some cases to sacrifice a bit of material. So I strike with d5. Okay, right away I'm chasing his knight off of its post, and I'm opening lines. I'm opening up this bishop, right? I can go to these diagonals, and I'm kicking his knight off of this diagonal, which leads to his king. So opening lines is good in this type of situation. Okay, and now I take advantage of that diagonal. Right? So he's going to have to pin himself. See how I develop a piece with tempo, and I'm keeping my opponent passive? Right? I'm not giving him lots of free moves to get his development together. I'm keeping him on edge constantly. So next, I chase this knight away, and then I bring more pieces into the attack. So the point of this move, for one, is obviously if he moves this rook, he can never castle. If he plays f6, he's severely weakening the light squares around his king, right? And so the only remaining move is another self-pin. So now his knights are pinned, and I continue to put pressure on him, mess up his pawn structure, and now, hey, he's still 2 moves away from castling, right? So I decide at this point that I want to get my own king to safety, because
So
it is
king is opened.
It is, exactly. So this is about timing. If I had, taken the time to castle a few moves ago, he would have escaped. But now his king, the the pawn structure around his king is ruined, and most importantly, this knight is pinned, and I'm going to exploit that pressure to prevent him from castling. So if I castle now, if I gave him one more tempo, he would castle and get away with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here is another crucial moment, right? He's threatening to fix his position. And remember what I said about don't be afraid to give up some material for the attack?
Mm-hmm.
So I play d6. So I'm creating a threat, obviously, against the bishop. But more importantly, I'm opening up the d5 square for my knight. I'm forcing his bishop off of this file, which will allow me to check the king. I'm also forcing his bishop onto a square where it's undefended. So basically, I'm sacrificing a pawn, but instead I'm gaining opportunities to make threats against his king and prevent him from castling. Okay, so I use this newly opened file to start attacking, and now his position comes crashing down. Right? He can't cope with all these pins at once. Bishop's pinned, the knight's pinned. Now the queen is tied down to the defense of these pieces, and his king is still in the center. So I exploit those pins tactically. Obviously, he can't take with the queen because of the fork. So instead, he has to move his king, but now he'll never be able to castle. And then the rest of the game, I will just create a mating net. And his king goes on a nice little walk here. And now I move my queen backwards. So, I mean, there are several ways I could checkmate, but you want to pay attention to these strange looking moves. Sometimes you can pull your pieces backwards, and they're hard to see, but it's these kind of moves can actually be very aggressive because now I'm threatening checkmate here, and the game ended like this, with a checkmate in the center of the board. Okay, so you see how I never allowed my opponent the chance to fix his position, right? I kept putting pressure, I sacrificed material to open lines, and I was able to hunt his king down in the center of the board. So any questions about that?
No.
Okay, so you have a good idea on how to attack your opponent if they don't castle?
Yes.
Okay, so now I'm going to show you another game. This is not one of mine. This is by Grandmaster Paul Keary's. And this also shows you how to attack an uncast king. Notice that white wins in just 20 moves. So let's get to it. Okay. So y'all know this is the Sicilian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so this is so far mainline Sicilian, the Niedorf variation. Okay, so this is all very typical stuff. But now, we have an opportunity. Okay, so without looking at the notation, what would you guys do here, given what we've already learned? So our bishop's obviously under attack, right? We gotta do something about that.
Which bishop is under attack?
White's bishop on c4. Because, like, the black queen is hitting it, right? So if you were playing white here, by the way, we're already castled. We've finished developing all our minor pieces. Now notice black's position, right? Black is clearly uncastled. Both bishops are undeveloped, and so it's going to take black multiple moves to get castled. That means we have the opportunity to attack, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, we call this a dynamic advantage. Dynamic meaning that the advantage can change over time. So it's in contrast to a static advantage, something like being a head material, which will pretty much stay with time. dynamic advantage is time sensitive, so you'd better use it before it goes away. What we have right now is an advantage that's going to dissipate if we just make normal moves and allow black to, finish developing and then castle, right? So the time to strike is now. Okay, so how do we strike? So the big hint is that our bishop is under attack, right? And we've got to protect it somehow or use it to attack. We've got to do something about this bishop.
Bishop d3.
Bishop d3 is passive, though. We're retreating, right? And remember, we don't want to give our opponent lots of time to fix their position. Time to strike is now. Okay, let me give you guys a bigger hint. Remember I said don't be afraid to sacrifice material?
Bishop to h6.
You mean bishop here?
Yeah.
Well, the problem is that, first of all, black can take the original bishop, but also this isn't really threatening anything, and even if black takes, this is actually not necessarily good for us, regardless of the material, because we're giving black the open g-file, but that g-file leads to the king, our king, right? So that file is actually one that black can use, not us. So I wouldn't want to open up over here. The king's on e8. Okay, so it is a sacrifice. You're on the right track. But why don't I go ahead and show you? So bishop takes e6. Now, I understand this one's a bit more drastic than, the pawn sack I showed you last game. But in this case, the king is going to be caught in the middle. And this is actually a pretty sound sacrifice. Okay, so you'll notice white brings another piece into the attack, right? This knight's being threatened, and instead of passively retreating, say to f4, white takes this chance and brings another piece into the attack. Now there are obviously threats of knight c7, which is a fork, and in general, black's going to have a very difficult time getting himself out of the situation because his pieces are so cramped, and most of his pieces are either trapped, like this bishop, or stuck doing defensive duties, like that bishop. Okay, so black's never going to get the chance to castle, right? In fact, he just goes king f7, because there's really nothing black can do. If he tries to get out of the situation, he's going to end up losing material somehow, right? So king f7 was his best chance. Okay, now the king is very much out into the open. Also, oh, my bad. King takes e6 was a big mistake. So black should have played knight takes f6, and then we have this complicated variation. White's still better, but black definitely has fighting chances. However, black got way too greedy here and thought, okay, well, if I can weather the storm, I will be up 2 pieces and can hopefully win in the endgame. But this is not the kind of storm you can weather here. So okay, white retreats in this case, but notice that the retreat comes with new threats such as queen g4 check. Okay. So bishop takes. White wants to trade down. And now, so white has several options here. White can bring extra pieces into the attack. Say with queen h5, queen g4, but there's another option here, and that is to simply cash in this this dynamic advantage for a static one, which is material. So in the game, Kyrus played knight b6. Okay, so obviously forking the queen and the rook, right? And now after the following sequence, he comes out ahead. So this is a really neat little trick here, okay? The knight's trapped, right? We're going to lose that knight. And it looks inevitable, right? So can anyone find a cute little tactic here to save that knight and get into a winning endgame? Give you guys a moment to figure it out. Because this right here can make or break the whole game. If Kyrus had not found this trick, then he would be down a rook for 2 pieces, which is not a good material balance. So how do we save the knight? So first off, obviously with the queen's attacking the knight, right? Yeah. Is there any way we could get rid of that queen?
Queen g4.
Okay, so the problem is that the king moves, and now we have 2 threats to contend with, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we could check, king moves. I don't know that we're making any progress here because we're just checking our opponent repeatedly. Mm-hmm. How can we get rid of that queen long term?
Queen d5.
Excellent. Queen d5. That's the correct move, and that's the move that was played. So now if black takes it, we could just take with the pawn, but I think this is the fun way. And then our knight gets out for free, right? And we're winning the endgame. So obviously the better try for black is king d7. And now this is a nice little trick here. So everything is actually defended. The knight's defended, the queen's defended. So he just brings another piece in. And at this point, this is a fun little tactic as well. If black takes the bishop. I believe. Yeah, queen here. And next, this rook is coming. So, all right, any questions about this game?
No.
Okay, so you guys now understand that if we're in a situation like this, right? Mm-hmm. Our opponent hasn't castled and is behind in development. So you should look at a position like this, and moves like bishop e6 should jump out to you. Now, I'm not saying that you want to sacrifice every time your opponent's uncastled, right? But what I want to instill in you is the ability to see and consider moves like this on a regular basis, right? So if you notice that your opponent is falling behind in development and falling behind in terms of, progress towards castling, you should immediately start looking for ways to take advantage of the situation. There is not always a way. Sometimes your opponent can get away with not castling. Not saying I recommend it in your own games, but it is a possibility. However, you should always be on the lookout for moves like bishop takes e6. You should always be thinking, well, is there a way I can take advantage of the situation? And even moves that involve the loss of material should be in your arsenal. So before we studied this topic, I'm guessing you'd look at this position and you wouldn't really consider bishop takes e6, right? You'd think, well, that move loses material. But now that we've covered this topic, hopefully you'll see a position like this and you'll at least consider bishop takes e6. You'll go, okay, opponent's behind. Their king's stuck in the center. I've got my development. Is there something I can do about the situation? And you'll see, okay, well, let's analyze the sacrifice. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but you'll consider it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, and also don't play like black did. Make sure you castle early, you stay on top of your development, because this is what's going to happen to you if you leave your king in the center, right?
Mm-hmm.
So next time you're playing a game and your opponent does this, you know how to punish it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That said, I want to give a warning. These kind of wild attacks only work if your opponent's done something to justify it, right? If your opponent's playing perfectly reasonable chess, you're not going to be able to just, sack a piece and all of a sudden have a crushing attack, right? That's not how it works. You can't create an attack from thin air. You create attacks come from weaknesses in your opponent's position. So in this case, the weakness is Black's lack of development and castling. But you can't, I don't want you to see a game like this and just be inspired to sacrifice because you feel like it. If that makes sense. Okay, so we've discussed uncastled kings. But what about if your opponent plays by the general principles and they do castle? Okay, don't worry, you can still attack the king. So I'm going to now switch gears here, and I'm going to show you something called the Greek gift. Have you guys heard of the Greek gift before?
No.
Yes.
Okay, some of you have, some of you haven't. I think this is something everyone should know about. Okay, so it's also known as the classic bishop sacrifice, and you'll see why in a moment. Someone's phone ringing. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a typical example of what the Greek gift sacrifice might look like. Okay, so this is a French defense, and this is the classical variation of the French defense. Now we push the pawn. It can arise in a number of move orders, but the important part is this pawn structure here. So it often arises from a French advanced, where you push the pawn earlier. Okay. And now the whole idea here, so if Black castles, right now is the time to strike. Okay, so this is more difficult to see because on its surface, it doesn't look like Black's done anything wrong, right? Black's, kept pace with White's development and has castled on move 6. So unless you know about the Greek gift, you're not likely to see this. However, there is a sacrifice here that pretty much wins for White, and that is bishop takes h7. So this is the classic bishop sacrifice, okay?
King h8.
Well, see, here's the thing. So if your opponent sacrifices material against you like this, but they've won some material, generally the best way to try to refute the sacrifice is to accept it. Okay? And this is important because here, if you know about the Greek gift, you might be tempted to play king h8, and that may be objectively the best move, but you're allowing your opponent to get a pawn for nothing, right? White's taken a pawn here. If you move the king, White retreats. And now we've opened up the h-file leading to Black's king, right? The queen can come in, the knight can come in. And the big problem for Black is that they don't even have any material to show for it, right? So if your opponent's going to sacrifice material against you, you should say, well, okay, show me what you've got, right? Make them prove that their sacrifice is worth something. Okay, so accept the sacrifice. Okay, but now we see how the Greek gift works. Okay, so Black has 4 possible king moves, and we can look at them in order of how bad they are. So this is obviously the worst, right? Black gets mated immediately. We cannot allow queen h5 to come in with check. So king g8. That's one of the reasonable tries. King h6. It's obviously bad. Why is this bad? What do you do here? Why?
Because if the king
Knight f7.
Knight f7, or I suppose you could also play knight e6. Doesn't really matter. We're gonna win the queen, right? Discovered check. Okay, don't walk into discovered check. Okay, so the 2 reasonable looking tries are king g8 and king g6. Okay, so let's see what happens if king g6. Okay, so here White has some interesting tactics. One device you'll see used often is queen to g4. Okay, and then the king is trapped in this in this potential discovered attack, right? The knight will move next, and it will be discovered check. So in this particular position, the right move for white is h4. Okay, so h5 is coming. It's pretty much forced. So let's say black tries to defend. We can play h5 anyway. And now the whole point is that the king is either going to be forced to f5, and then we just have mate, or the king will be forced to walk into this discovered check like we saw earlier. So h5 is the big threat, and there's no real way for black to stop it. Okay, so this knight on g5 is super important because it prevents the king from ever running to f7. Say black plays f6. That doesn't do anything. Okay. So yeah, back to this position. Another common trick you'll see is queen g4. And sometimes, black will play f5 to try to refute it. Again, it varies by the specific position, but we'll look at a game shortly that goes over another example. But this is a fairly common pattern, right? So f5. If you take en passant, the problem is that the king might be getting away. We've lost our control over that f6 square. In this case, it doesn't work, but in other cases, sometimes black will try to escape this way. And whenever you sacrifice material, it is important to keep up the pressure, right? Obviously, you've given up a bishop, and that's a static advantage. So black does have that static advantage of being ahead in material, which means, again, if black can make it to an endgame, then black will win, right? If you're playing black here, you just got to survive until the endgame, and then you'll be up a piece and you can convert, right? So white's job is to finish off black before that happens, or to somehow win back the material. And that's actually pretty common. Sometimes instead of checkmating, your opponent will have to give up even more material just to stay alive. Okay.
Yes.
So this is a common device. So some of the main patterns here are either queen h5 and mating on h7, right? Or queen g4, h4, h5, or this discovered check here. So those are the main ideas of the Greek gift, and you want to have your pieces set up so that once you make the sacrifice, the rest of your pieces can spring into action. Okay, so I want you guys to be very careful because sometimes it looks like you might have a Greek gift type situation, but it doesn't actually work. Okay, so I'm going to show you one such example. Let's see if you can figure out why the Greek gift doesn't work. Okay, so what's different about these positions? Okay, like what is the main important difference?
The pawn on e3 is not on e5.
Yeah, and why does that matter?
Because it controls one of black's escape squares or something like that.
Okay, so the pawn on e5 is very important to the Greek gift. The reason being that it controls f6. So yes, we've looked at some examples where f6 is a flight square for black, but most importantly, black likes to have a knight on f6, right? If you go back all the way here, when we played e5, right, we kicked the knight out. And that knight, that knight is often the main defender of our kingside castle. So if we kick the knight out, then this is what makes the king side really weak, right? You'll notice that most of the box pieces are over here on the queen side. Okay. However, the knight can go back to f6. So that is the problem with not controlling f6. That's the problem with not having that pawn there, right? Mm-hmm. So if we try it, king takes. Okay, now black goes back. So we want to play queen h5, threaten mate, but black can just play knight f6. And now that hits the queen and stops checkmate. Okay, we don't really have follow-up. We can go back, but now...
What if he plays rook e8?
Here. So if rook e8, then for one, black loses this. Then we go back, and then we check, and black is getting mated by force. So if you see this kind of situation, okay, yeah, don't panic, right? It looks scary. Your opponent's threatening mate in 1, but knight f6 is a very common device in situations like this, if the f6 square is available to you. Okay, and that's why you have to have the pawn on e4. Not necessarily a pawn. For example, it could be a bishop, right? If the bishop were here, we'd take it anyway. But your opponent should not be able to play knight f6 if you're doing a Greek gift. Okay, so some other important factors we see when delivering a Greek gift sacrifice, like I said, general lack of black pieces on the king side, right? And we should have a knight available to hop to g5. So notice this bishop is here protecting g5, right? We could also have, a pawn on h4 or something, but we should be able to play knight g5. And the queen should be available to come to h5. Okay, we talked about no knight f6. Generally, black shouldn't have lots of pieces in the vicinity. Okay, so before you're considering the Greek gift sacrifice, you want to make sure you have all these elements lined up, because you are giving up a piece. So, does this make sense to all of you?
Yes.
Any of you French players, by the way?
No.
No, you don't play the French.
I only played the not defense, I think. It's a Spanish it's a Spanish name, but I can't pronounce it.
You mean the Spanish?
Yeah, I think so.
Lopez?
Yes.
That's a good one. Good choice. But if you ever do play the French defense, this is something that you really want to watch out for, because this kind of pawn structure, in a broader sense, not just about the Greek gift, but when you have pawns like this, fast forward a little, when you have pawns like this in a chain, generally the direction of the pawn chain tells you where you want to attack. Okay, so white's pawn chain is pointing at black's king side, while black's pawn chain is pointing at white's queen side. Okay, and remember what I said earlier, you can't just attack because you feel like it. You have to attack where your opponent has some weakness or you have an advantage. Okay, so for this to work, white has a space advantage on the king side. Right? The pawns are moving this way. White has more pieces that can get involved. Okay, so you attack where you have the advantage. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to look at a game now. It's an actual game between masters in which one of them got to play the Greek gift. So hopefully, once you've learned this, you will have plenty of opportunities to play the Greek gift yourself in your games. But do you notice something about this opening?
Oh, it's the
French defense, right? We're seeing
Advance.
yet another French defense, and it goes very similarly to the previous example. Okay, the e5, right? Same thing as before. Okay, bishop's traded off. Okay, right away, what's that pawn doing? It, among other things, it covers g5, and that'll be important later.
What if you plays queen h4?
Here, queen h4, we just played g3 and kicked the queen out. So this is kind of a waste of tempo. White would enjoy having this pawn chain, and we've gotten that move in for free, right? So don't play checks unless they help improve your own position in some way. Okay, a6, keeping the knight out of b5, right? Because that would be very annoying. Okay. So far this is a relatively normal game. Okay. So black makes a big mistake here, and that's castling kingside. Okay, so what do we do now? By the way, black should have traded this off. This bishop's way too dangerous. And if you're going to castle kingside, black should have traded that. But black did not. Okay, black's castled here. h7's weak. What do?
We capture the pawn.
Exactly, right? Bishop takes h7. Same deal.
Knight G5.
Yes, Knight G5, the pawn supporting it. And now, if black goes back, do you remember what we do?
We move the
Queen H5.
Queen H5, right? We're threatening mate. This time, there's not a way to get out of it. But yeah, they get mated. So, King G6 was necessary. King H6 was... It's basically a worse version of the same idea, because then Queen G4 and Queen H4 would come with check. So, King G6. But now, do you remember this device that we talked about? Right? The queen lined up with the king
yes.
with a discovered check coming. And again, there's no way for black to really step out of that discovered check. So black tries to... actually, black tries this first. So this is an interesting move. It wasn't possible, obviously, in the last example. Things were a little different. But this is a very good try, because this pawn is what you call overloaded. It's protecting both this knight and this pawn, right? So obviously, if we capture the knight, black will take our knight. We do not want to trade off pieces here, right? We're down a piece. If we trade off more pieces, go into an endgame, we will lose. So instead, you have to keep up the pressure. White does so with the threat of Queen H7. Okay, and black's putting up a really tough fight here. Okay, so this next move is highly instructive. It's very tempting to keep going for checks, right? You see Queen H7, and you'd want to take here and think, oh, the king's on E5 and must be close to checkmate. But actually, this is very bad, because the king can flee to D6 and just hide away, right? We have no good way of stopping the king from reaching D6. So, instead of rushing into this checking sequence, white brings another piece into the attack. It's important to use all your pieces. And cuts off the e-file. So white is slowly boxing in black's king. And now notice that there will never be a king e5 available to black. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't rush. Okay, so again, black's putting up a really good defense here. The whole idea of knight e4 is to block up the e-file, basically undo the merits of white's rook e1. So now queen h7 check. White initiates the sequence. And then, so this works out tactically for white, because the f-file can also open. By the way, if we go back here, there's a reason white chose the a rook. Right? So this rook isn't doing anything. It's undeveloped. This rook is performing the important function in the event that the f-file opens, which we see in this example. So white starts to open things up. And also notice that white now has the option to regain material. Okay, so here, a couple things. Okay, if black takes, then white takes here.
King takes.
Then, yeah. Yeah, this is winning.
Have a king d6.
King d6. And then, yeah, queen b4. That's the move.
King d7.
Here it is. Okay.
King e8.
King e8. Okay. And white has a way to win. What's the winning move?
Queen a4.
Wait, is this right? Hang on.
Queen 4.
Make sure I got this right. Yes, queen takes. Oh, my bad. We take the rook first. My bad. Now how do we win?
Rook d at 1.
Nope. So the queen's undefended, right?
Queen takes e6.
No, the bishop's protecting e6.
Oh, we moved queen to b4.
Excellent. Yes. So this is a skewer, right? The king and the queen.
And then when
anytime your opponent's pieces are undefended, you want to look for those tactics. Okay. So. Okay. So, didn't mean to do that. Okay. So back to the actual game here. Okay, so black. So we looked at what happens if black takes the knight. So black runs away. Now white has already regained the material, right? And this knight's pinned. Black can't take it. But notice the white has a really beautiful outpost on d6 available as well. White's just completely winning here. So, yet again, instead of giving a random check, say g6 or d6, white cuts off black's king's escape route, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to remember that device when you're attacking. Right? Just cut off the escape squares. Black is finally trying to get out of the situation. By the way, again, in the French defense, this bishop tends to be terrible, blocked in by its own pawns. Those bishops accomplish nothing this whole game. And now white makes use of that outpost here, and just black's position comes crashing down. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, technically, white's up. Okay, white's up 2 pawns, but it's mostly the weakness of black's king and the strength of white's pieces that decides this game. So now black's hopeless, right? If black tries to, say, king d8, we have all sorts of nasty discovered checks. So this isn't really, but it's fun to see how it ends. Notice, so we didn't really achieve a checkmate, right? However, white was able to, again, cash in the attack for a material advantage. Okay, black just had to give up too much material and position to defend the king. And then white was able to come through and win. All right, any questions?
No.
So the final thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a game by Alexander Alekhine. Do you guys know who he is?
No.
Okay, he is a former world champion, and he is perhaps the greatest attacking chess player ever to have lived. He's very famous for his attacking chess, and we're going to see here one of his games that combines several of the concepts we've learned today. So it's really a treat to watch him play. See how he just demolishes his opponents from seemingly innocent positions. So as if, you make one mistake against Alekhine and suddenly you're dead. Your king's getting hunted down. So this is an unusual opening. It's called the Danish Gambit, I believe. Not commonly played these days, but this game was played quite a while ago. I think it was about 100 years ago. So it's a gambit, meaning that we sacrifice a pawn early on, but in return we gain an advantage in development. So white gets some free tempos and also open lines. Notice that now this is available to the queen, right? So when you play gambit, oftentimes you're looking for, an aggressive opening that gives you more attacking chances in exchange for the material. So right away, white's set up to attack, right? The bishop's aiming at f7. Okay, black plays queen f6. What's black threatening? Kind of funny.
f2.
Yeah, black's threatening scholar's mate, right? He's threatening a world champion with scholar's mate. I find that amusing. So obviously, if you're threatened with scholar's mate, the best thing you can do is to just develop your pieces, right? Develop the knight to f3 or f6. Stop the threat and get another piece into the game. Simple. Okay, don't bring your queen out early. This is not a good way to play. Okay, so, all right, so what have we got here? Okay, white is all castled, almost done with development. What do we have over here, guys?
Uncastled king.
An uncastled king. Right? So, are we gonna just, make a developing move and let black castle? Is that what we're gonna do? No. Right? We want to strike.
F7.
What?
Bishop takes F7.
Well, I like your ambition, but that move doesn't quite work because black can take with the queen, and the damage done to black's king side doesn't compensate for the piece. We have something that doesn't give up as much material, but is more effective. So one of the things discussed.
E5.
Yes, E5. And so the whole point of this, first of all, it forces black to respond, right? We don't want to give black the opportunity to castle. And it forces black to respond immediately because it's a threat on the queen. But it opens lines. So what we're trying to do here is open up the E-file where black's king is, right? Because if we can just attack down the E-file, then we'll have something extremely powerful. Our rook can spring into the game, and black's going to have a hard time ever finishing his development. So this right here, now black's knight's pinned. And do we want to trade queens here?
No.
We've given up material for an attack. By the way, white's actually down 2 pawns because one of them was given up in the gambit.
We need 2.
So we need 2. Now I will add a disclaimer here. Black does get to castle. Okay. But white's pieces are so much more active than black's, right? I mean, black's queenside development still unfinished. And we now know that even if our opponent castles, doesn't mean we don't have an attack, right? So, Alia can get another one of his pieces developed with tempo, right? Attacking the knight. Bishop 5 might run into F6 or something, but here the pawn's pinned. Okay. Bishop D3. Oh, where's that bishop aiming?
Oh, it's aiming to G.
H7.
Yeah, it's aiming at H7, right? That even if we don't have, the traditional Greek gift, that is still a really weak square because it's only defended by the king. Also note the lack of a knight on F6, right? So if we go back to where black castled, black's king side is really weak, right? This knight on E7 is a liability at this point. So now white's taking aim at black's weakness. Okay. Knight F5. So trying to block up the diagonal, which is smart, but black's pieces are very uncoordinated, right? This queen should not be on D4. You guys have heard about not bringing your queen out early, right?
Yes.
Do not bring your queen out early because then your opponent can just attack that queen with tempo. And then you'll have to move your queen and you'll waste your time. Meanwhile, your opponent gets more and more pieces out, which is exactly what happened here, right? So what's the threat right now?
For
white. Yeah, what is white threatening?
Bishop E3.
Not really, because the knight can just take it. But there's a way for white to win material here.
Queen E8.
No. What's going on here?
Oh, bishop takes F5.
Yes, and that's a discovered attack, right? So white's rook's lined up with the queen, threatening a discovered attack. So black has to step out of that using another tempo in the process. And now this pawn hangs. And with that pawn, black's entire position just starts to crumble. Okay. So here, white kicks the knight off that diagonal. And now here comes the really fun part.
Knight E7.
Not quite, because knight E7. Well, actually, we gotta be careful because our queen's under attack. So if black takes, now we can't afford to take back, right? We lose our queen. So we have to do something really drastic, okay?
Bishop
And
takes
we
H7.
have several pieces close to the black king, H7's weak. What did you say?
Bishop takes H7.
Exactly. Okay, now I'm not calling this the Greek gift sacrifice. It's a little bit different because we don't have the knight G5 and stuff. But nonetheless, we are taking advantage of the weak H7 square and the fact that black doesn't have pieces close to the king besides this rook, right? Black's king side is just generally very undefended. So again, attack where you have an advantage, right? White has the advantage on the king side. We strike, obviously king H8 runs into immediate trouble with queen H5. So black has to accept the sacrifice. And now queen H5 check, king goes back. It'd be really nice if we could play knight E7 checkmate. That'd be a pretty checkmate. But we have something else really nice. So knight F6 check, right? So Aliekin wastes no time. He's just super efficient with his attacks. Knight F6, bringing another piece into the attack. Obviously, G takes F6 is forced, and bishop takes F6, and now white is threatening queen H8 check, right?
Mm-hmm.
So black actually resigned here because it looks like mate is inevitable. Now, I just thought I would show you how the game really should have ended. And black here has a pretty nice tactic. Knight E2 check. Okay, so what would you do here as white?
I would.
Rook takes E2.
Okay, so here's the catch. Rook takes E2, runs into bishop takes F2, check. And then when we capture the bishop, we lose our queen, right? We just walk right into a discovered attack. Okay. So, what's another alternative here?
King H1.
King H1 is the correct one, yes. And King F1, again, looks even safer, but it runs into this. This is really nasty, because now the queen comes here, working the king and bishop. And then black hasn't won any material in this whole tactic, but black's traded off white's powerful bishop, and now white's actually just down 2 bishops, right? Attack's over. So actually one white can take, but white's still down a piece. And we sacked a lot of material to get here. So, so knight E2, right? Then this is a lesson on don't resign too early, right? Just thought this was an instructive moment from the game. So if it looks like you're losing, but you have that last try, always go for it, right? Don't give up so easily. So, many players would definitely overlook this. And on the flip side of that, the lesson is never get overconfident in your attack, right? So we've worked really hard to get to this position. We found all the sacrifices, the accurate moves. But imagine you get to this point in the game. Your opponent plays this one last desperate spike check. And then you're like, they have absolutely nothing, right? They're getting mated, they're being silly. And then you lose your queen, right? So this is a reminder just to be careful until the very end. Always look out for your opponent's forcing moves, especially ask yourself, what are they threatening, right? What is my opponent trying to do? And watch out when you have undefended pieces, right? So just be very careful until the end. Don't get, overly excited just because you have a good position. Stay calm and calculate. Okay. So in the game, black resigned, but this is the sequence after which there's no way to stop queen h8. So Aliekin won in 20 moves just by attacking. All right. So you guys remember all that we've talked about today? Is it sinking in for you?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, so just remember, right? King is uncastled. We want to seize the opportunity, right? Strike while we can. I did in this game. Curie's in this position, right? Seize the opportunity. And remember the factors that allow you to play the Greek gift. Bishop takes h7, right? Knight g5, queen h5, something covering f6. All right. Well, if there are no questions, then that's all there is for today. I'm going to send you guys some puzzles related to attacking the king that hopefully you'll solve by next lesson. Thank you, everyone, for being such good listeners. I hope you had a good time, and have a nice rest of your day.
You too.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.